بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد إخوة الإسلام عباد الله. First and foremost, be a little patient with me because I'm a little under the weather and it may be heard within in my voice. Now, first and foremost, the topic of this particular clip, I found some inspiration in doing this particular clip based off a video that reached me of a Christian and Muslim debating in Speaker's Corner. And as usual, when you see those types of debates, they flip from one subject to the next, and thus forth and so on. And in the course of their debate, they went into the meaning of God, God's name. What was God's name? And of course, the Christian, he said Yahweh was the name of God, the supreme being, the creator of the heavens and the earth, and thus forth and so on. So of course, the Muslim, he said, no, well, his name is Allah. And so the Christian, he responds, no, Allah is just a word that the Arabic equivalent to the word God. And the Muslim, which I agreed, he stated that Allah doesn't mean that. And so the Christian pressed him on, well, what does Allah mean? And this brother, he came with some adjectives before and after the word God, but that's basically what he was saying, the exalted, supreme, the God, or, it's kind of some jargon of this nature. And the Christian basically said, man, you're saying God, you're just basically putting these adjectives in front, but you're basically coming right back to you saying God, right? And so I came to realize quickly that the Muslim didn't know what the name Allah means. And for me, this is a little sad. And I think that it's something that should be looked at as tremendous, especially considering the fact that Allah is the deity that we worship. And from basic Islam 101, we should understand what this name means, especially if we're in a position where we're giving dawah to non-Muslims. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, he teaches us, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي الْآيَةِ. Allah says, say, commanding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say to the people, this is my path. This is the path of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I call to Allah. I invite to Allah. The invitation was to the worship of Allah, not to the worship of Muhammad, but to the worship of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And this is an indication that a person has to have ikhlas. The da'i has to have some ikhlas. Because he's not calling to himself, he's calling to the Lord of all that exists. He's inviting towards his worship. So he states, I invite or call to Allah upon basira, upon what is intended by basira, knowledge. But then the Prophet Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala says after that, Ana wa man ittaba'ani, me and those that follow me. Me, and this is referring to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and those that follow me. So those that are following the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, following the prophetic traditions of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, following the commands of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they are those that are inviting to Allah with knowledge and understanding. So this is why this is important, because I agree with the brother. Allah, it does not mean God, especially when we look at the definitions of God. I'm on the Merriam-Webster's dictionary website, And it says, one, for the first definition, God, the supreme or ultimate reality. The supreme or ultimate reality. The name Allah doesn't mean that. The name Allah doesn't mean that. For anybody that has sat in classes as it relates to al-asma wa sifat, it doesn't mean that. The name Allah. And then it has a sub such as, and then it has the being perfect in power, wisdom and goodness, who is worshipped as in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, as creator and ruler of the universe. Now, Muslims don't disagree with this definition as it relates to the creator being perfect in power, wisdom, and goodness, and he is ma'bud, he is worshipped, and he is al-khaliq, he is the creator and ruler of the universe. But again, the question was, what does the name Allah mean? And although Allah has these attributes that are mentioned, that's not what the name Allah means. Although the name Allah indicates or points to all of these perfect attributes, as we'll see. And so the point that I'm making, because I could keep reading, but the point that I'm making is we have to understand who it is to whom which we direct our acts of worship, and call others from outside our community, yani the Muslim community, to the worship of that creator. Right? And the most effective way that we do that is if we understand who he is ourselves. Now, when dealing with the names of Allah, we have the statement of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, who he says, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. To the end of the ayah. To Allah belongs the best of names, so call on him with them. Call on him with them. Allah has the best of names. When you go into the books of Aqidah, you commonly find that the scholars, they explain that Allah has the best of names. Why? Because every single name of Allah points to a complete and perfect attribute that is free from flaw and defect. And when you analyze these attributes that each name indicates or points to, that's where you get the meaning and the intent of the name. So for instance, to give an example, we look at simply the names Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim are two separate and distinct names of Allah that both point to Allah being Dhu Rahmah, one who is possessing mercy. But when we look closer and distinguish the difference between these two names, then we have a more clearer understanding of what these names mean and or point to. As the scholars, they say Ar-Rahman, it points to Allah being Dhu Rahmah al-Wasi'ah. That Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is the sole possessor of extensive and or vast mercy. And so what is intended by this is that mercy here for this name is a wasf for Allah, or a descriptive term. He is being described as merciful. And so it's without a doubt correct that it would be translated as the most merciful. Why? Because it's a descriptive term of Allah. However, when we go into the name Ar-Rahim, like I said, it points to Allah being the sole possessor of mercy. However, there is a distinction being made because this name doesn't point to a descriptive term, it points to action. In other words, it is referring to Allah being a sole possessor of mercy that is granted and or bestowed upon his creation. In other words, if I were to translate this in simple terms or in layman's terms for the name to be fully understood, Now we'll simply state, for instance, the one who acts mercifully with his creation, or the one who acts mercifully. The most merciful, Ar-Rahman, and the one who acts mercifully, Ar-Rahim. That's how I would translate that, and Allah knows best. Because the first name pointing to a descriptive term, the second name pointing to when Allah acts or action. So the point of coming with this example is to show that every name and every name points to a complete and perfect attribute. And when looking at this complete and perfect attribute, this is how we ascertain the meaning of the name. And so Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, the name, the majestic expression, Allah, likewise points to a complete and perfect attribute, and it's incumbent upon every Muslim to understand this. The name Allah, the attribute that it points to is Dhul Uluhiyya wal Ubudiyya, the sole possessor of divinity and the one who solely merits servitude. And this servitude is in the absolute sense. It's not in a partial sense. It's in the absolute sense. And now I'll explain what I mean by that. Every aspect of the creation gives some aspect of, or some partial aspect of servitude to another aspect of the creation. For instance, if a person is employed by another person or company, then there's a certain degree of servitude that employee has to his employer. It's not in the absolute sense, but there is there's a partial aspect of servitude. Why? Because he's listening to his boss, and he's executing his boss's orders. So there is a partial degree of servitude. However, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is he who merits servitude in the absolute sense. That requires a person to humble themselves and lower themselves. To love Allah and to fear Allah, and thus forth and so on. This is what the name is pointing to: the sole possessor of divinity and he who is solely meriting servitude in the absolute sense. This is what the name Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala indicates or points to. And for this reason, it is not correct for anyone in existence to name themselves with the name Allah on account of this attribute that the name points to. There is nobody in the creation that is the sole possessor of divinity. Nobody shares in that. Nor is there anybody in the creation that solely merits servitude in an absolute sense. Because again, if we look at the child and the parents, the child to a partial extent has some type of servitude to his parents. But there is no way that the child would direct servitude to the parents in the same manner that he would to Allah, because Allah merits and deserves servitude in the absolute sense. So this is what the name Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala means. And you wouldn't necessarily translate that into God. Because first, we understand that these are names of Allah. These are names of Allah. And then two, just by reading a definition of God, then it doesn't exactly reflect that. Although in this definition there is some attributes of Allah Ta'ala mentioned that we don't deny, but the name is pointing to a specific thing. Just like the statement, La ilaha illallah. How some people wrongly translate it as, there is no creator except Allah. Now, automatically, the true meaning of La ilaha illallah, it will indicate or point that. It will indicate or point to that. However, the meaning of La ilaha illallah is not specifically meant to bring out that meaning. There is another meaning behind the statement La ilaha illallah that is more at the forefront. Although it could include there's no creator besides him, there is a point, or there is something being demanded when you state La ilaha illallah. And it's not necessarily affirmation of him being the creator. What is being demanded? Negation of negation of worship to all created beings, and affirmation of worship to Allah Ta'ala alone. That's what the statement means. And by default, you could say there's no creator except Allah is included in that meaning, especially if you're negating worship to any and everything and affirming worship to Allah Ta'ala alone. But the reality is, there's something more that's demanded by that statement. And likewise, with the name of Allah, there's something clearly demanded or clearly intended by that name. And I think I'm going to end it here. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.